The cowboy had lived alone for so long that the sound of his own voice had become foreign to him, the creak of his porch boards and the whistle of the wind through the mesquite trees being the only company he knew. Years had passed since he had felt the touch of another hand or the comfort of another soul beside him, and his ranch, once built with hope for family and laughter, had grown into a fortress of silence where only the dust storms dared to enter. Every morning he saddled his horse, rode across the barren plains, mended fences, tended cattle, and returned home to an empty table where the chair across from him waited, like a ghost. He had chosen silence because the world had taken too much from him. Friends, buried under desert soil, a woman he once loved who had ridden away with another, and the slow dying of his own spirit until all that was left was a man made of shadows. But fate is not without a cruel sense of humor and a kind twist of mercy. For one night as the moon hung like a silver coin in the sky and the coyotes sang their lonely hymn, a knock echoed against his door, sharp, desperate, trembling with a force that rattled his very soul. And when he opened it, there she stood, an Apache woman, her clothes torn by the desert wind, her eyes dark pools of fire and sorrow, her hands shaking as she clutched the wooden frame as though her life depended on it. She whispered words he never imagined hearing. "Cowboy, please marry me." Her voice cracked with fear yet carried the weight of destiny. The cowboy, stunned, stared into her eyes, searching for meaning, for trickery, for truth. But all he saw was a woman who had fled something darker than the night, a woman who had crossed rivers, plains, and danger to arrive at his doorstep with nothing but hope and desperation. And though his lips had forgotten the language of kindness, his heart stirred with something he had buried for years. He invited her inside, the firelight catching her weary face as she explained, between breaths, that she was being hunted by men who wished to claim her as nothing more than property, that she had no family left, no village to return to, and that she believed in her heart the cowboy was a man who could protect her, not because she had known him, but because she had seen him once, long ago, standing tall against riders who had tried to steal his cattle, a lone man who fought like a wolf against the pack. And she carried that image in her mind, whispering to herself that if she ever found him again, she would give him her life. And now here she was, trembling in his cabin, asking for his hand, not out of love yet, but out of faith that love could grow in the soil of protection and sacrifice. The cowboy listened, his silence heavy, his heart warring with his loneliness. And finally he poured her a cup of water, set bread before her, and spoke for the first time in days. "You don't even know my name, and yet you ask me to make you my wife." His voice cracked with rust, like an old gate opening, but she looked at him and said, "I know enough. I know you are the man I have been searching for." And in that moment, something shifted in the air. The cabin no longer felt empty. The table no longer carried the weight of ghosts. And though the cowboy could have turned her away, could have sent her into the cold night to face whatever hunted her, his soul would not let him. For in her eyes he saw the mirror of his own longing, the hunger for belonging, the courage to take a chance on the unknown. And so he nodded, not yet saying yes, but not saying no, letting her stay, lighting a new fire in the hearth. And as the flames grew, the silence that had chained him for years began to break, link by link, her presence filling the emptiness like spring rain on parched land. And though neither spoke of love yet, the seed had been planted in that night of desperation and courage, a seed that would change both of their lives forever. And as this tale unfolds, dear listener, remember this is only the beginning. Stay with us, for in the next chapter you will see what the cowboy does when destiny demands his answer. And if this story has touched your heart so far, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you never miss the rest of this journey. Because every story we share brings you closer to the fire of the old Wild West, where love, fate, and courage are written in the dust and stars. The dawn broke gently over the cowboy's ranch, painting the sky in strokes of gold and crimson. And as the first rays touched the land, the cowboy sat on his porch. the Apache woman beside him, both silent yet bound by an invisible thread stronger than words. The knight's fear had faded, but her request still hung in the air like smoke. She had begged him to marry her, not out of games or whims, but because survival and hope demanded it. And as he looked at her face in the morning, light, so fierce yet fragile, he realized his years of silence had been waiting. For this very moment, all the pain, all the loneliness, all the emptiness had carved him into a man who could finally understand what it meant to choose someone not because he needed them, but because together they could heal. And so he stood, walked into the small cabin, and returned with the only thing he owned that could serve as a bond. A simple piece of leather cord he had once tied around his horse's mane, and he took her hand, wrapping it gently around her wrist as he whispered, "If you will stay, then you are already my wife," his voice steady and sure. And in her eyes the fire returned, not of desperation now, but of love's first spark. The fear that had once chased her was gone, replaced by the safety of a man who had chosen her, and together they stepped off the porch, facing the wide-open land, not as strangers anymore, but as husband and wife, bound not by ceremonies or witnesses, but by the silent promise of two broken souls who had finally found each other. And so the lonely cowboy who had lived in silence for years was silent no more. For the rest of his days his heart would carry her laughter, her voice and her love across the endless plains, and their story, carved into the dust of the Wild West, reminds us that even in the darkest loneliness, a knock on the door can change everything forever. So, dear friends, if you felt the power of this tale, make sure to subscribe to the channel, because many more stories of love, fate, and courage await you under the same wide western sky.